Good morning, everyone. Before we get started here, I wanted to welcome you. Thanks for joining us. I'm excited for y'all to hear this presentation today about a tool that Burns& Mac has been working on for us over the last little while. So it should be helpful for you for your recycling programs, whether you have one already or whether you're going to be starting a new one. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them. But just one quick thing, that if you do have a question, just go ahead and type it in the chat whenever it pops into your head, and we will have two opportunities for questions, once right after the presentation, and then they're going to do a demonstration of the tool, and then at the end of that. So we will get to those questions at those two times. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Scott and Philip.
All right. Good morning, everybody. This is Scott Pasternak. Are you able to hear me okay? Okay, great. And my apologies, my camera doesn't seem to be cooperating this morning, but hope everybody is doing well. And as Aaron mentioned, Burns& Mac has been working for the last several months with HGAC to develop the recycling tool that we're going to share with you all today. And this tool has been developed based on our experience having worked with a number of local governments, not only in the HGAC region, but across Texas as well as on a national basis. It's also been informed by a number of Burns& Mac team members who have directly operated recycling programs on behalf of local and regional governmental entities before coming to Burns& Mac, and even some of our staff who previously operated recycling facilities. So we feel like we have applied a lot of that great knowledge and information for your benefit, not only today, but into the future as you're able to utilize this model. So I'm joined today by Philip Kramer and Heather Krall from Burns& Mac. They'll both be available to answer questions, and Philip will be doing most of our presentation this morning. And Philip, if you could start sharing, or Aaron, if you could please allow us to share the presentation. And then go to the next slide. And so I'll turn things over to Philip in just a moment, where he's going to start off with providing an overview of the project, and then to get into an understanding of how to utilize the report and user guide that have been developed as part of this effort. And then we want to get into an actual demo of the Excel tool that we have developed. And he's going to run a couple of different scenarios that could be representative of different community needs. And then we'll be able to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, we really appreciate you all joining us today. And I'll turn things over to Philip.
Great. Hello, everyone. As Scott mentioned, I'm Philip Kramer, one of our solid waste planners and analysts here at Burns & McDonnell. Before I start, can everyone hear me okay, or see the presentation that I'm sharing on my screen? Great. Thank you. So like Aaron said, at the end of this presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions, so type those in the chat. And then following this presentation, I'll go into the actual user guide and model. And at the end of that demonstration and walkthrough, there'll be another opportunity for questions. So starting off with section 1 here, we have our project overview. So for phase 1 of the project, this was conducted with Burns & Mac staff, including Scott Pasternak, Heather Krall, Allison Icarius, and others who are not on this call. But this was to provide general planning guidelines for recycling programs for the topics that you see listed there on the screen. And there were several members of HGA staff that were present for those training sessions. And if you have any additional questions or want to hear more about the insights that were shared during these training sessions, feel free to reach out to the HGAC staff for that information. Following those training sessions and kind of building off of them, we moved into phase 2 of this project, which was the recycling operation needs assessment tool. So this is an Excel-based model that's designed to help communities estimate resource requirements to implement or improve recycling drop-off facilities and curbside collection programs. And it's designed to both be a very easy to use and give you high level analysis quickly. But if you want to, do a deep dive into the building blocks from the operational to capital and financial side of an operational program, those, inputs into that system are all very accessible to you through this model. And so kind of that training information that we provided with HGA staff kind of equips them with the knowledge and understanding to help guide you and your communities in using this tool and developing great recycling programs for your residents or community. So like I was saying, this was developed through an iterative process. So starting with phase 1, and then to kick off phase 2, what we did was we established a project task force of several member communities throughout the HGAC region. And we met with this group several times over the course of the model development. And one of those steps was conducting a nationwide best practice and resource review. So tools that exist and understanding what is already out there and what are the communities of your region using to inform the recycling programs that are already in place. And then we also conducted a regionally focused gap analysis. So understanding what are the gaps or what are the deficiencies that could be enhanced via a needs assessment tool specifically focused on recycling. So all of these informed what we designed and developed for this needs assessment tool. And just some of the key benefits that were identified in collaboration with the project task force are listed there. Obviously, giving you an understanding on key financial issues related to recycling. A great use of this, and specifically knowing that this was funded by the HGAC and from grants from the EPA and TCEQ, is supporting future grant opportunities so that you guys can use this resource to make the case for your recycling programs, to enhance or implement these programs, evaluate the impact of growth in your communities and what that means for your recycling program. And then also, kind of like I was saying, from the trainings and what we've used for the inputs of our model, this is kind of a dictionary of best practices for operation and using best practice vocabulary and metric reporting, how Burns and Mac would communicate that to the communities that we work with on a day-to-day basis with regards to their municipal recycling operations. So now moving into kind of phase 2 of this presentation, which is the report and the user guide. So each of these primary bullets here is a section of the report that I will be sharing with you at the conclusion of this presentation. So first of those is summarizing that best practice review and gap analysis. And we would strongly encourage, once you have access to this document, to review what we found from our resource on existing tools and guidelines that can be used, because these are great existing resources for you, and kind of equipping yourself with the knowledge of those tools can help inform how you engage with this new tool that HGAC will be providing you with. So I provide you with one example that you may find on that document, which is the US EPA Recycling Infrastructure and Market Opportunities Map. So this provides a locations for recycling facilities and infrastructure such as material recovery facilities, or MRFs. And the reason that I highlight that is because one of the inputs that we use in our model is kind of distance to a processing facility or disposal facility. And so if you're a community that doesn't already have a recycling program in place, you may not know where you can take your material once it's collected. So kind of using this existing resource to inform how you approach this new model could be very beneficial. The next section of this user guide and report is a discussion of the assessment tool structure and data sources. So this was a key component of that engagement with the project task force. So we defined a key list of items that needed to be included and specifically focused on in our development of the tool. And there are several items here. You can read them there in the box there, but there was a lot of items that were specifically highlighted by the project task force, such as the accepted material and composition, what is the impact of contamination, drop-off facilities, specifically with regards to rural communities that want to make the case that these facilities are beneficial to their residents, on both a citywide and countywide basis, and so on. So all that discussion is included in the report for when you're reading it, and can kind of give you a background on how we approach this project and how it was developed. So next, we move into the user guide, and this is a very high-level overview, but the structure of this user guide is it gives you the information required to navigate an inputs page in the model that allows you to make program decisions for up to 6 unique scenarios. And the structure of this user guide is there's definitions for all the terms and inputs that we are requiring. And there are, for every line of the main inputs component of the model that we will provide for you, we communicate the line. What are the possible values that you can enter into the cell? Where does that link throughout the rest of the model? So if you are kind of more detail oriented and want to understand how the calculations are occurring, you can trace that. The largest discussion then is the model use in the notes, which talks about, kind of provides more insight into the calculations that we're conducting, the information that was used to compile the data and inform the decisions that are being made. And that's, like Scott was saying, all informed by Burns and Mac's experience working with communities on a day-to-day basis with regards to recycling operations. And so specifically focusing now on the user entries, the way that this model is set up is all formulas are locked, but there are cells that are specified by blue highlighting and blue text, whereas everything else would be black, that indicate to the user that this is a cell where you should enter in a value. And so what we've done on this main inputs tab, and I will show you shortly, is we've allowed for the selection of multiple default or custom or high, average, low custom states for each component of the recycling program. And what these default values reflect are the best practice metrics, operating assumptions that Burns and Mac has evaluated across the communities for recycling. And as you see there in that final bullet, that default selection is the selection that we would strongly encourage you to select unless you're kind of a subject matter expert or leading your recycling program and have the understanding of the very granular or nuanced components of a recycling program. The good thing is, though, that if you select default for one thing or custom for one item, but you don't know the answer to something more challenging, such as what would your backup ratio be for collection vehicles, the model will automatically revert back to the default value so that you can kind of pick and choose where you want to customize on a scenario by scenario basis. Moving on to the next section of this report, this is a deeper dive into the recycling drop-off facility analysis. So this is developed to be kind of a companion to the user guide. We heard from our project task force that there was a specific emphasis and desire to have more information and ability to make the case for these recycling drop-off facilities to their regional governments, counties, or cities. And so what this does is for each of these topics you see listed here in the left-hand column of this table, we've answered the questions that are provided here on the right-hand side of the table. And this discussion was developed by Heather Kroll, who has experience operating and managing and working with communities to run these programs. So any specific questions here that I can't answer, Heather will be a great resource as well. And thinking about how this relates, so for the user guide, when you are reviewing that eventually, what you'll see is that there's, for the drop-off specific entries there are links in the document that take you to a corresponding section in this recycling drop-off facility section to provide more detail on best practices and help you make the decision if you're unsure about what is the best approach to entering in the values or making program decisions for specifically related to recycling drop-off facilities. So now moving into probably the most exciting part of this presentation, and I'm sure what many of you are here to see, which would be our tool demonstration. So just to give a very brief overview of how we've set up this tool. So there's 4 main components. The first of those being the main inputs tab. So this allows you to enter in those custom selections for up to 6 scenarios at once. And as you see there, and like I described, there's many selections that have you selecting between the recommended default or your own custom values. Now, if you wish to take a deep dive into the inputs that we have provided to you all in those default selections, or if you would like to enter in your own custom values, you can navigate via links to the detailed inputs tabs. And so for each component of the model, as you can see listed here, which corresponds with kind of each stage of recycling processing operation, you can do so, evaluate those inputs, make the changes needed to have a custom value. Now, this information is then pooled and informed by the selections that you've made on the main inputs tab to these detailed calculation tabs. And so as you can see, for all of these input sheets, except for the general finance one, there's a corresponding detailed calculations tab. And this sheet is provided for kind of the transparency and information purposes, so you can have an understanding of what are the calculations that are happening in the background. And it's very detailed for those of you that really like getting into the weeds of recycling programs. But for those of you that just want to make selections, and on the main inputs tab, this information then flows into a results summary tab, which pulls all the most important and salient information from these detailed calculation tabs into one easy to read page, so you compare scenarios kind of on that macro level. So what we've prepared today in terms of a model walkthrough are 2 scenarios that compare 2 different programs each. So the first of these is, what if you're a rural area establishing or looking to establish a drop-off facility? And the question that we're asking here is, should I develop a basic or advanced facility, and kind of making that decision based on cost and looking at the operating requirements for that. The second scenario that we'll evaluate is, what if I'm a city that wants to set up a curbside collection program? And for this one, since our task force identified that understanding what is the impact financially of higher contamination and what does that do to the revenue that's generated from the recycling program, we're going to evaluate specifically that question in what is the impact of varying contamination rates. So those are the scenarios we're going to walk through in a second. I'm going to pause here, and before I switch over, ask if there are any questions from the group.
So right now there are no questions in the chat for us.
Great. So if y'all would just give me 1 second. So before we jump into the model, I am going to do a brief overview of the report and user guide. So
And we did
as you
have
can,
one question pop up, Philip.
oh, great.
So, okay, it says, when you looked at contamination rates, did you notice what educational components existed in those programs?
Yeah, so this is, so the approach that we took to the contamination rates, Burns and Mac has done multiple recycling waste audits across the state of Texas. And what we did for our default values is evaluate for the total waste stream of trash and recycling, what is the composition of the material, and that includes the contamination and the recycling. So the contamination rates that are used in the model are Texas-based averages, and there was not a correlation analysis that was conducted related to recycling education. But what the model does provide you with is kind of for the education and outreach, what we would recommend for high, average, and low spending on a per household basis annually. And so the programs with higher contamination rates, we would assume that there's little education and outreach being conducted. So if that's the scenario what you would want to evaluate, we would recommend using the entering in a high contamination rate and low education and outreach, and the inverse is kind of equally true from our recommendation.
All right, thank you.
Great. Yep.
Oh, one more. Okay, so when and where will we be able to access the tool? So HJC will be housing that tool. So you'd be able to reach it through us, through our website, or by contacting us. But yeah, we'll be posting it on our website, but we'll also have information on how to contact us if you need some assistance as you do want to play around with it afterwards. It will not be posted today. I'm not sure exactly how long it'll take. Maybe next week. But yeah, it should be soon that we get it on our website. So yeah.
Well, if there's any other questions you guys think of, again, a reminder that at the end of this walkthrough, there will be another opportunity for questions. So please just keep putting them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer. Okay, just Aaron, one quick check. Are you able to see the report? Okay, great. So as you can see, just looking at this table of contents here and what I presented, you can see that this corresponds to each of the sections that we discussed. I'm going to jump to the user guide. So this user guide here communicates what I shared with you just a bit ago, but just so you can kind of see the approach that we took and put some visuals to what I was describing. So we have our definitions, and then when we go into the selection guidelines, as you can see, we've communicated where's the line, and then the prompts, the user entries, and then model use and notes. So this tool, and as we now shift into the model in just a second, you'll see how this lines up with how we've structured that model. And then the final section of this report was the recycling drop-off facility. And so what we've included is images of the items that we've discussed and a discussion on how we kind of provided this best management practice for recycling processing. So now moving into the model walkthrough. So just as a reminder, this first scenario was the one in which a rural community is looking to establish a recycling drop-off. So I'll just back up here. So we do have in the model the cover. We do have a table of contents tab with links that take you to the corresponding sheet. And throughout the model, there are links that bring you back and forth to where you need to go. And since this is a rather large spreadsheet, if you do get lost, you can just right click on the arrow down at the bottom and navigate via this Activate tab and get where you need to go. So for this main inputs tab, just to give you the general overview. So the first selection, and one of the things we evaluate is what is the kind of adjustment on costs with regards to location. So what we have presented here is are the MSAs for Texas. And the recommendation here is to just select the closest city or region to where you're located. So for this selection, I've selected Victoria, Texas, but obviously there's also Houston, the Woodlands, Sugar Land. Or if you think that your community is closer to in cost, specifically with regards to labor and O&M costs with any of these other cities on the list, you can select any of them and that'll be fine. If you're looking for more detailed information about this, there is this MSA price tab, which is data that's from the BEA. And there are these blank values here. So if you have information from your regional planning group that gives you information on regional price parity, or you think you want to create a custom scenario, you can just make an adjustment here and enter in, and just when I then go to this drop-off list, that is now available to me. So obviously the MSAs are the best source of information, but we know that they're kind of larger scale and for specifically rural communities, you may be looking for something more localized. So that flexibility is there for you all. And just one more thing on that is comparing it to just the United States average across the whole continental US. So that is the baseline for this evaluation and cost. So the next component of the main inputs tab is kind of the household service area. So you enter in the total number of households and then distribute that amongst the housing types. And again, definitions are provided in that user guide. And just kind of caveat to you all, this is not based on any of your specific communities. So this 10,000 households is purely random and used for example purposes. So the next component of the user guide and what's explained in there is that wherever you see these blue cells, this communicates to you that a user entry is required. So as you can see in columns G and H, I've already started and I've filled out 2 scenarios. But if I want to kick off the process of developing a new scenario, I just enter in, whatever scenario name I want, and it begins to unlock and kind of display cells from this dark gray color to the light blue to communicate that that information is required. So I'll do just a kind of a slow scroll and highlight some differences between these 2 scenarios. So scenario 1 here is what we're doing here is we're evaluating if we're going to establish a new facility, what is the difference between a basic facility and an advanced facility? So keep that in mind from column G to H, where column G is the basic and column H is the advanced. So we have our generation information. And then for drop off, what you see here is for the basic facility, we're just going to collect everything single stream, meaning that all the recycling material is commingled. For scenario 2, which is the advanced facility, we have a lot more source separated material. There is some commingling of plastics. And then for both of these scenarios, we've excluded scrap metal and plastic film and flexible packaging. Now on the collection, since we had households that were within the urban and rural categories, I've entered in yes to these. And then from the drop-off menu, selected drop-off only. And the assumption here is that participation within a drop-off program would be lower. So I've entered in a 50% participation rate for these households. For multifamily, we've indicated that that is not included. So looking into the main selections of this scenario, so both of these are selected as new facilities, which means that we will consider the cost of land, paving, fencing, et cetera, all in the kind of amortized and annualized cost of the facility. Whereas if it was an existing, since drop-off facilities can last significantly long times, what we've assumed is that those costs would not be incurred annually for this specifically related to those construction costs. Now, here you see the select the drop-off facility type, and we've distinguished between the basic and advanced. The way that you can think about basic is kind of parking a roll-off box in a grocery store parking lot. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen that before. And so that does not require a facility or kind of any sort of gates or an attendant building, etc. So as you can see here, by selecting basic, it automatically kind of eliminates that selection there for the attendant building. Whereas the advanced kind of indicates to the model that we are going to have all the bells and whistles from attendant building and gates and security and utilities, et cetera. So, and then if we are going to have an attendant building on site, the selection here, and kind of funny, but the distinguishing factor between cost is what is the bathroom situation? So the inclusion of a restroom or the exclusion of it or using a prefab structure significantly impacts the amount and cost of utilities that are required for that facility. So these other selections here are all default, but I just want to quickly explain the calculation that's being made for the single stream recycling receptacle and same thing for the source separated. So the approach here, as you can see, I've selected default. And what this is doing is you're allowing our model's calculation of what is the most cost-effective approach based on the values in the model between a open top roll-off dumpster and a compacting roll-off dumpster. And so this considers the cost of the container, maintenance, hauling costs, how frequently you're going to have to haul that, and it makes the decision of what would be preferred. It also considers if you're going to be baling material, you'd want to use an open top container so that you're not double handling material. I see there is a question about the tools and about what these circles are, and I will show that in just 1 second. So the other distinction that I made was because this on-site processing. So in scenario 1, that's the basic facility. In scenario 2, that's the advanced. And remember that scenario 1 had generally single stream recycling. And then scenario 2 had a lot more source separated. So by on-site processing, we mean baling and selling that material directly to market. And so what I've done is I've entered custom here. And what these red circles here represent are links to the corresponding inputs tab where you can make entries into custom values. So as you saw, I clicked on that circle, it took me to the exact table where making the custom selections would occur for that specific line in the main inputs tab. And then as you can see, for each of the 6 scenarios that you can potentially enter, you can do custom values for each one of those. So there's, really infinite combinations of scenarios that you can evaluate with this model. And so for this one, the default assumption for processing on site is no baler, no processing. But if you want to do a more advanced facility with baling, what you would do is for For the material types, just indicate yes. So what I've done here is selected yes for OCC, mixed paper, aluminum, and then I've also selected glass. Important caveat there is the model does not assume that you're going to be bailing glass. Not sure how that would work, but obviously wouldn't go well. And so once I've made that selection, I can click the link back here, and it takes me directly back to the line where I made that selection. So that's what those circles are, and that's how you kind of navigate to make the changes to those selections. So this material is all going to be direct hauled, and then, but there are, for if you have a collection system that's utilizing a transfer station, you can enter in and evaluate the operating and capital and financial requirements of that as well. And then the final stage is for processing. So what you do here is you enter in kind of estimated or your actual processing fee per ton, revenue share percentage, and then you also enter in at the MRF, what is the assumed recovery or rate of the material, how much additional residue would be generated after processing or material that's going to be missed. And then finally, you have your commodity price option. So I did show the one example of kind of an inputs tab. As you can see, these yellow tabs all exist for those inputs. And then just to show kind of what the model looks like on the calculations tabs and kind of emphasize the point that these are the very detailed nitty-gritty components of a recycling system. This is all the crazy formulas that kind of make the magic happen. So since we've selected default for container type, these calculations are doing those, what is the more cost-effective approach for these materials? And then capital requirements, equipment requirements, and that all leads up to give you the total household cost, and then cost per household per month, and then cost per ton. But all of this information, for those of you that kind of just want to enter in your inputs and then figure out what this is saying to you, are summarized on that results summary tab, like I was explaining earlier. So this summarizes the program inputs, how many people you have, how many households are participating, summarizes just the most important information, capital, operating, private overhead, and profit, and gives you that information rolled up into one so that you can evaluate on a annualized basis, what is this program going to cost you? And so that, like we were discussing of what is the need for this model, what are the benefits of this model, can help you make the case that, hey, I've used this model to do a high level review and planning level estimate of a recycling program. And here is what it spit out with regards to how much it's going to cost our residents on a monthly basis. And so if you can see for these two scenarios, between scenario 1 and 2, so the annualized capital cost is obviously much, much lower on a annualized basis for scenario 1, which was the basic facility. But that operating requirement was much higher because we incurred the cost of hauling, et cetera. Whereas for scenario 2, our capital requirement on an annualized basis is much higher. We have a slightly lower operating cost. And the assumption there is that, and based on discussions that we've had with folks in the industry, is that when you're selling material directly to market, that price typically includes the cost of hauling that material to market. So you don't incur that additional cost when you are processing material on site. But if you do want to add that cost in, you can as well, this model. And so between these two scenarios, we figure out additionally that there's additional revenue that can be generated per ton with processing on sites. That is a revenue offset for us. And so when we evaluate these two scenarios and the approach that we've taken here, what we spit out and find is that the cost between these two scenarios is actually very similar when you take all those inputs into consideration. So just kind of summarizing this here, giving you the information you need, So you can do your inputs, make custom selections, get into the nitty gritty if you want, or just review on this summary tab of what exactly does this mean? What is the high level number that I need to communicate to my city council or public works director, et cetera. So that's our first scenario, just kind of walking through specifically the drop-off scenario. And now what I'm going to do is show you scenario 2. And just key things to point out here. We've changed the MSA to Houston, Woodlands, Sugarland. And we've increased the number of households to 150,000, with more of this being your high density, medium density, and low density. So it's kind of a city situation. So obviously won't kind of do the detailed walkthrough of these selections, but I will point out what is different about these two scenarios. So first of all, the key question that we wanted to ask here is if we're establishing a single stream household collection system for recycling, what is the cost of that going to be? And what is the impact of different levels of contamination going to be? And so for this scenario, for the collection tonnage, glass is in the system, plastic film and flexible packaging is not in the system. And then for our contamination, for scenario 1, we're using the default 22%. And again, that was based on Texas-based recycling audit data. And then for scenario 2, we've increased that contamination percentage up to 40%. So keep that in mind when we're evaluating these scenarios. This system is also assumed to be entirely collected out the household, so there are no recycling drop-off facilities. And as you can see, this is a curbside only system, like I was saying. And the assumption here is that all households in this community would receive access to the recycling program. So we assume that the participation rate is 100%, even though on a weekly basis, it might be lower, but everyone is in the program. So all of our selections here with regards to collection are the same. Just some information about these calculations. So this conducts based on the number of households and Burns and Mack's experience doing time and motion and routing studies for communities. What is it going to take? How many trucks, how many people, how many routes are going to be required to collect this many houses? And then we kind of build the system around that. So these default values are all informed by those routing studies that we've conducted and equipment prices that we're seeing on a daily basis. I've selected default for all those. And for this system, there is no assumption of a transfer station. We've assumed that it's direct haul and the processing facility would be 10 minutes away. So this scenario could be one where maybe you are contracting out your recycling processing collection and you want to look at what is it going to take to go in-house. And so there may already be a MRF in your community. So you're just looking to see what would it cost for us to do this and take it to the existing facility in our community. And then for the processing component of this evaluation, just kind of switched it up with regards to the processing fee and revenue share. I've also made a selection here. So for the commodity price, what you see here is we've assumed that the cost to dispose of residue and contamination would be $40 a ton. And so we've added in that additional cost for evaluation. So going back to our main inputs tab and evaluating these two scenarios. So difference between these two. So we didn't change the amount of recycling material that's going to be changed that's going to be generated and disposed between the two scenarios. But what we did say is that there's going to be more contamination entering the recycling stream. And so there's a significant difference in the amount of tonnage between these two scenarios, and that's primarily driven by the increase from 22% to 40% contamination. Since it's the same households that are required for collection, our model has calculated that the cost for collection is going to be consistent across these two scenarios. So on a per household per month basis, that's going to be around $16.16. And then for our recycling processing, so for the system that has, you know, a processing fee of $94 with a revenue share of 80% and relatively low to average contamination at 22%, that cost of recycling processing is going to approximately break even on an annual basis. Whereas when we have the much higher contamination rate, and then also the need to then dispose of that or have a additional fee tacked on to dispose of that material at a landfill at $40 per ton, that cost of managing the material increases significantly. And so we go from that breaking even to adding about just under $1 per household per month in cost. And then we have our education, outreach, and compliance, $300,000 per year. And now here we can compare the total annual cost. So it's not a huge swing, but you can see that when you're dealing with, increased contamination, that's obviously going to lead to significantly increased costs of processing and reduced revenue that's being generated. And so we're looking at about $1.3 million difference in the cost between these two scenarios that we've evaluated. And you could do this, exercise for various levels. You could also say, what if we reduce our contamination from 22% down to 15 or 10 or and so on. So we can do the inverse as well and evaluate what's the financial impact of that. So all in all, this results in a cost per participating household of $6.30 for scenario one, which is the kind of the average contamination rate. And the other one is $7.03 for the higher contamination scenario. And then just kind of highlighting here, also a big part of, when you're operating collection system is, hey, what's the personnel, what's the head count, what's the equipment requirement? So this sheet also provides information about, the high level summary of what people are required, what equipment is required. So you have that and can kind of, if you want to, divide those costs on an equipment or a headcount basis as well. So that information is provided for you as well. And that same information is also shared for drop off and transfer station material. So those are the two scenarios that we wanted to walk through with you today. Obviously, there's, as you're thinking about this, there's a million things that you could evaluate with this model. Kind of looking forward, there will also be opportunities for one-on-one training sessions, and more information will be coming from Aaron and the folks at HGC regarding that. So if you have questions about that, please stay tuned, and we'll be able, Burns and Mac will be able to help you kind of set up this model and have you ask questions about how this could apply to your community and answer any questions you may have. So that being said, I'll answer some specific questions. I see there's one in the chat. That personnel requirement is FTE. So did that answer your question, Leo? So everywhere in here we have the assumption that the FTE hours are based on 2080 operating hours per year. So, and there's also opportunities for you if you want to enter in, 0.5 FTE, et cetera. So you can signify part-time, et cetera, throughout the model.
So yeah, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat. If you really want to ask your question, not through chat, you can raise your hand and we are able to unmute you if that would be more helpful to you to do it in that way. So you can have a little bit of a discussion. So I'm excited about the tool. I do not operate a recycling facility or a recycling program at all, but I am excited about what this can do for our communities in our region and also across Texas. So, and how it can help improve those programs because we do want to keep them going. So.
No raised hands here.
Yeah. Okay, we do have another question from Lou. It says, does the model take into account depreciation of assets?
Yeah, so for all assets, we calculate the total cost, so lump sum basis, but then we also amortize that. So what you're seeing, the annualized cost is assuming, interest rates, and then also, at the end of that useful life, the assumption is that you'd have to replace that asset. So that's kind of an ongoing cost. So yes, any sort of capital requirements of these facilities are depreciation is accounted for.
Okay. Nothing else has popped up. So unless they have a really long question that they're typing, which I can't tell. Maybe that is it. So I will just start talking, but if we see one pop up, we will go back to it. So I do want to thank Philip for this presentation, for walking us through how to use the tool. It probably seems a little overwhelming, but when you do read through that guidance document that he was referring to during the presentation, it does really help understand the tool and how to use it better. So but I am excited to be able to provide this for y'all. And as I mentioned earlier to the question, we will be getting this posted to our website. I don't know quite how many days it'll take to get that done, but we will be getting that posted and we will let you know. I'll send out an email to all of y'all that were in attendance and also those people that signed up but weren't able to actually attend today. So yeah, still no more questions. So I guess you did a great job, Philip, of explaining it. So thank you for that. So if you wanted to say anything else at the end or not. And like you mentioned, also those one-on-one sessions, I will be sending out information so that you are able to schedule one of those with Burns and Mac, just to get more specialized information for you. So.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone who showed up today. We appreciate it, and for everyone that participated on our calls throughout the project, thank you as well. Your feedback was very much appreciated, and you obviously helped guide this project. So we're looking forward to sharing the tool with you all.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.